Perhaps you'll remember that time when Mullah Nasruddin was sitting at the coffee shop with his friends. One of his friends said to him, "Mullah, why is it you never got married?" And the Mullah said, "Well, you see, I was looking for the perfect woman." His friend said, "Oh, did you find her?" He said, "Yes," with a sigh. "But let me tell you my story. First, I met this woman. She was beautiful. She was gracious. She could cook like an angel, but she didn't have a spiritual bone in her body. And then I met a lovely lady who could quote Rumi and the Upanishads. She was lovely, but she couldn't cook. And then I met a woman who was perfect in every way, totally spiritual, could cook, and was gracious." So his friend said, "Well, Mullah, why didn't you marry her?" And with a deep sigh, the Mullah said, "Well, it seems that she was looking for the perfect man." And perhaps you'll remember Yusuf. He was that young man who wanted to get married. He'd, by his own means, become successful, a successful trader. But every day when he passed his neighbor's house, he noticed a face in the window. So one day he went to his neighbor and he said to his neighbor, I want to get married, and I thought perhaps you might have a daughter." And his neighbor said, "Well, as it happens, I've got one daughter left." But he said, you wouldn't want to marry her because she's a shrew. She's got a terrible, terrible temper." And Yusuf was listening attentively. But then his neighbor leant over to him and in a very conspiratorial tone said, "But you know, I've heard that there is a well of sweetness. And if you can get 3 drops of the water from that well of sweetness, it will change anyone into a sweet and kind and beautiful being. But you wouldn't want to go on a quest like that. You wouldn't want to marry my Fatima." "Oh," said Yusuf, "yes, I'm up for a quest. I can do it. I'll do it. Tell me, where can I find out where I can find this well of sweetness?" And his neighbor said, well, I believe the old woman who sits on the steps of the mosque begging, she knows." So Yusuf set himself off and he went to the old beggar woman on the steps of the mosque and asked her where he could find the well of sweetness. And the old woman said, "Well, it is in the land of the giant." "Well, how do I get there?" said Yusuf. And she said, "Well, you travel 7 days and 7 nights to the east, and then you travel 7 days and 7 nights to the west, and there you will come to the land of the giant." So Yusuf set out, and he followed the instructions explicitly, 7 days, 7 nights to the east, 7 days, 7 nights to the west. And he found himself on the fringe of a land that was beyond his imaginings and not known to him before. But there was a little farmhouse there, so he went to the farmhouse and he asked the farmer, "Where can I find the land of the giant that has the well of sweetness?" And his farmer said, "Well, it's right there, just to cross that field over there." He said, "But when you meet the giant, you better be polite to him because, he can just squeeze you between his fingers and you're gone." So Yusuf entered that territory, unknown to him, a strange place. But of course, in his wanderings, he became very tired, so he lay down to rest. And after a time, he turned over, thinking to himself, this is just like my bed at home. It's so soft and comfortable. But then he opened his eyes, and he found that he was nestled in this huge hand. And this giant, in a great booming voice, looked down at him and said to him, "Oh, little human, who are you and what are you doing here?" And Yusuf, remembering what he'd been told, said, "Oh, gracious and great giant, honorable giant, my honor and greetings to you." And he told the giant his request. He was looking for the well of sweetness. And the giant, in his booming voice, said, "Well, nobody's usually polite to me. And since you've been polite, I'll tell you. The well of sweetness is located not too far from here. But I tell you, when I point it out to you and show you the way, you will find when you go into this place that you will meet a three-headed dragon. And I can tell you that you must say to this three-headed dragon, in the name of King Sulaiman, may blessings be upon him, let me pass." And the dragon will allow you to do so. So the giant showed Yusuf the opening to the passageway, a great cavern. And just as the giant had said, he hadn't gone too far along the passageway, then there was the dragon blowing flames. He remembered what the giant had said, and after he said these words, the dragon stepped aside and allowed him to pass. But then there was a strange light that kind of led his way to an area where he could see the well. And standing beside that well was the most beautiful being he had ever seen, otherworldly, and without a word, she took the vial that he had brought with him, and with her own hand she drew water from the well and placed the drops in the vial before passing it back to Yusuf. Now Yusuf was very grateful, so he bent down to kiss the hand of the beautiful being that had gotten the water for him and handed it to him. But as his lips touched her hand, she disappeared. So Yusuf, with his vial of the well of sweetness water, made his way back along the passageway. But strangely, this time it seemed that he had to cross rocks. It was dark and barren and dank. He had to feel his way down the passageway until again he met the three-headed dragon, and again, saying the words that had been given him, he was given a free passage. But when he came out of the great cavern, there was the giant. And the giant said to Yusuf, "Ah, I see that you've been successful in your quest. Well, now you must serve me for 1 year and 1 day. So Yusuf was left with the task of washing giant shirts, of stirring great cauldrons of couscous and rice. And so the year and the day passed, and the giant said, "You have served me well. You are now free to go," giving him a bag of gold. So Yusuf came back to his hometown, and there was his neighbor. And Yusuf handed the vial to the neighbor, who thanked him and said, "But Yusuf, you've been gone so long. We wondered what had happened to you." But after a certain exchange that we can imagine, Yusuf went home to prepare for his marriage. The Qadi was called and arrangements were made for the festival and the ceremony that would take place. And so there was a grand wedding. Yusuf was very happy, and it came to the moment that he and his new bride were meeting in their bridal chamber, and Yusuf lifted the veil that hid his new wife's face, and beneath that veil was a beautiful being. And when Yusuf spoke to her, her voice was like the dove's, gentle and kind, and he congratulated himself, and he said to his beautiful wife, "How fortunate I am, and how wonderful that I went on my quest to get my water from the well of sweetness, which has made you this beautiful being." "Oh," said his wife, "but I've been like this all along. This is the way I speak." And she began to laugh, and he got quite affronted. "Why are you laughing at me?" And she said, "You see, it is my mother who is the shrew." And my father said that he heard that if he got water from the well of sweetness, it would change her demeanor. So he made a promise that I would not be allowed to be married unless I married a man who brought back the water of sweetness. Well, we know the end of the story. The Yusuf and his beautiful wife lived happily without a coarse word between them for the rest of their lives, and Yusuf was so happy that he didn't have a mother-in-law. Kind of makes you think of this business about the male and female stuff, doesn't it? Been into that over these last days with the visitors that have been coming. Seems to be a big problem at the moment, this male-female stuff. What does this story bring up for you relative to this? Where are you with this right brain, left brain situation? Or is it something else? Is it really to do with right brain, left brain?
I think it's the male female stuff. I think it's those stories we tell about happening ever after and all those sorts of things. That's a memory of a time in the golden era when everything was perfect, and we carry that memory. And so we try and have that again, and then it becomes, as we move away from that state into a lesser state, then it's not, the story and the external don't match. And so therefore it's a bit weird, so people don't understand it, and then they try and make it work and it doesn't, and it's quite strange, and it becomes a little bit deformed. And so the male and female stuff isn't quite right anymore.
But it's very physical. How can we get away from it? We've got a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. We've got a physical circuitry. It's positive and negative. What these stories tell us about this. I'll leave it with you. Thank you.